Hi, everyone. Welcome to Gender Spectrum's broadcast for teens. It's an honor to co-host this conversation with my friend and colleague, Meredith Abrams. My name is Adam Chang. My pronouns are she or he, however is used respectfully. And today's hour-long event is titled Expanding Understandings of Gender. But before we begin, we want to just do a big shout out, a big thank you to our partner, the Happy Hippie Foundation. Happy Hippie Foundation is a nonprofit created by Miley Cyrus back in 2014 and created to support this mission of getting support and services for homeless and LGBT youth. For more information, you are invited to visit happyhippies.org. And today's broadcast is really meant to connect users to an online space for resources, tools, and support. With help from the Happy Hippie Foundation, Gender Spectrum has relaunched its online community, The Lounge. The Lounge is a free service for teens, parents and caregivers, and professional service providers who are working with gender-expansive youth. And we really actually have put in a lot of energy and resources into this programming. So we invite you to check out the resources we have available. We have frequent video support groups for youth. And to learn more about upcoming programs, simply visit www.genderspectrum.org/lounge. And I'll turn it over to you, Mare, to introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Mare. My name's Meredith, but I prefer Mare. I use they, them, and theirs pronouns. It's a pleasure to be here today. And before I let Adam kind of break down this next hour for us, I wanted to give a little preface that Adam and I are going to be talking a lot about our personal experiences and some concepts and terms related to gender that really resonate with us. We want to just let people know that we're offering just one perspective and that there are a lot of other definitions and understandings out there that are important to also recognize and honor. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Adam to kind of let you all know how this next hour is going to look.
Yeah, this is a really just sneak peek outline. We're going to share a little bit more about our personal backgrounds, and it'll be done kind of interview style. I created some questions for Mare. Mare created some questions for me, and so we'll go back and forth that way. And then in this hour, we really want to highlight how Gender Spectrum works with young people. And we're going to interject some terms, some definitions. We'll work it into our stories, our own personal narratives. And I also want to throw out there that we do have a vocabulary list set up. So there's a link to the vocab list on the lounge already. If you log in, you go to the teens group and it's there. Otherwise, on the left-hand side of your screen, if you locate the icon that says Showcase, you can also see that we shared 3 different links for you. One is for the Happy Hippie Foundation, one is for the lounge, and then one is specifically for this vocab list. But don't worry if you can't access it now. We'll kind of jump into it during the next hour. Then at the very last part of this conversation, we'll have some time for some live Q&A. We know that a bunch of you from the Happy Hippie Foundation have kind of live tweeted and submitted your questions ahead of time, and we have a few of those ready to go. But we also invite you to, again, use the Q&A icon on the left-hand side of your screen as well. And if you want to submit a question, we might check it out and we might answer it as well. So let's jump into it. Let's begin. My actual first question for you, Meredith, is if you could share a little bit more about Gender Spectrum as an organization and what is Gender Spectrum's mission?
Great. Well, thanks for asking, Adam. Gender Spectrum is a nonprofit organization based in the Bay Area, but does work nationally, and we provide education and information to schools, caregivers, and youth about gender. We also work closely with youth in order to create more gender-inclusive and sensitive environments. Adam, I'm curious what your role at Gender Spectrum is, and if you could kind of share a little bit about how that looks.
Sure. My title is Community Outreach Coordinator, and I've been with Gender Spectrum for 2 years now. But really my role now involves working with youth from across the country on various projects related to creating understandings of gender and just creating safe spaces that are inclusive of gender expansive youth. maybe I'll share a few examples of how we do that. One is actually a program we just launched at the beginning of this year. It's our National Youth Advisory Council. And so we have teenagers, high school age students, college age students from all over the country, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Texas, Michigan, Oklahoma, Wyoming, just to name a few. And every 2 weeks, our youth council meets together for about 2 hours, and we're discussing projects, current issues, and we're creating new campaigns to implement in various parts of the country. Another way we work with youth is actually through direct outreach to youth and youth who directly outreach to us. So we know that there are already youth leaders out there who are doing amazing work, and they contact Gender Spectrum for help, and we are always interested in learning and hearing about what youth are already doing, and if they're looking for additional support or looking to kind of get some greater national attention to whatever project or campaign they're working on, we are definitely interested in supporting youth that way as well. And then lastly, of course, there's the lounge. We're going to probably mention the lounge a lot today, but it really is this free online tool service, online community. Teens can meet with other teens, parents can meet with other parents, professional service providers connect with other professional service providers, and really it's all in this one space in which people can speak openly about their experiences and ask questions and know that there will be somebody there to respond back to them, right? So how about you, Mare? What is your role at Gender Spectrum?
So my title is Program Coordinator, and basically what that means is I support schools, families, and communities to access Gender Spectrum's training and education resources. So if a school or a family is in need of some support and some education and some resources, I work with that family or school to make sure that they get where they need to be or get what they need. I also have a role in developing and leading programming for youth and caregivers in our online community, The Lounge.
Great. So I want to ask another question, and this is where we're going to get a little bit more intimate, a little bit more personal. But I'd like to know, Mare, just a little bit about where did you grow up? What was it like being Mare in your hometown?
Awesome. Well, I grew up in the Midwest in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. The community where I grew up was predominantly white and straight. Issues related to sexual orientation and gender were rarely discussed, and I didn't know a single young person who was out as LGBTQ until I left home. I definitely felt pressure to fit in living where I was living and to identify with the gender that was assigned to me at birth. I didn't have many examples of what it looked like to be gender expansive. Gender expansive is an umbrella term that we use for individuals that broaden commonly held definitions of gender, including its expression, associated identities, and other perceived gender norms. So that's a little bit about my experience and where I grew up. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I grew up and was born and raised in San Francisco. People who aren't familiar with the Bay Area, it's about 40% Asian, and I'm Asian American. My dad's from China, my mom's from Burma. And so growing up in this kind of mixing pot of an immigrant community, right? Our neighborhood that we specifically lived in at the time was predominantly Black and Chinese, and so there were those racial ethnic dynamics as well. So urban setting, and by the time I started going to school, elementary school, I was enrolled in a Christian school, and that was an interesting experience. Learning Bible verses every week, and really taught that there was just one dogma of right and wrong. This is what morals are, and kind of not really encouraged to challenge norms, right? But by the time I went to middle school and high school, I did go to a public school, and again, this is a space like San Francisco, and we're notorious and known for the Castro area, for the LGBT community. And by the time I was in high school, I was frequently visiting Castro area with friends, and it was just nice to sit in a coffee shop or a bakery and be surrounded with like-minded people. And overall, it felt safe going to school. We did have a GSA, but I probably should point out that GSA, this is like what, 15 years ago or so, was probably different from a lot of schools' GSAs today in that we met kind of every other week, but our meeting location wasn't disclosed publicly. And do you have a guess, Mayor, why maybe we didn't share where the GSA meetings were?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's for people's safety, right? And so we would have the GSA meetings and we would have our counselor advisor, but you would only know where the GSA meeting was taking place if you were a part of GSA. And it was just because it just, while it was San Francisco Bay Area, it still wasn't safe to be out, and you didn't want to be outed and for people to either pick on you or for people to take the news back home and out you to your family, right? So, different times, different things have happened, but I think San Francisco really was a bubble in and of itself, that it created a safe space and it was a safe environment, but I know that San Francisco isn't anywhere else in the world, so yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Adam. So before we get into this next question, I wanted to throw out Gender Spectrum's definition of gender identity. So gender identity is someone's innermost concept of self as male, female, or some combination of both or neither. It's really how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. So one's gender identity can be the same or different than their sex assigned at birth. Some people develop a gender identity that matches their biological sex, but for others, gender identity is different from the sex that they were assigned at birth. Adam, given that, I'm curious, how do you describe your gender identity?
Yeah, and I guess a place for me to start is to just name my sex assigned at birth, right? And for me, that was male. So genitalia, sex assigned at birth, doctors saw this body when I was born and said, you're male. But if I had to say what my gender identity is, I would actually probably say that it's somewhere in the middle of male and female. And that's really because I think when it comes to social norms, the roles I take on in my family, in my community, in society at large, that I really do find myself taking on something in the middle, and I don't know how else to put it other than that. I think maybe sometimes people have asked me if I'm gender fluid in terms of my identity, and I don't think gender fluid is quite me. The way I understand gender fluid is on any given day or any given week or period of time, you could shift between male and female or in the middle, and I don't think I catch myself shifting really, and I think that I really just know that it's something in between, and I stick to it, and I'm really comfortable with it. How about you, gender identity? How would you answer that?
Gender identity. I think the word that I like to use the most is non-binary, and to me that means some combination of male and female, masculine and feminine. Non-binary can mean many things to many different people. I think it's important to kind of provide a definition. Non-binary can describe any gender identity which does not fit within the binary of male or female. So there are lots of different names for non-binary, and non-binary can also be used as an umbrella term for a lot of other different identities. And so some of the identities that I would include in non-binary are agender, bigender, two-spirit, gender neutral, demi-girl, demi-boy, masculine of center, feminine of center, and even tom-girl and tomboy. Those are just some terms that are non-binary, but it's important to note that there are also new ones being introduced every day.
So given your personal background and identity where you grew up, have you talked to your family about your gender? If so, how did they respond? What was that like?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I am out to my family as a non-binary queer person. Genderqueer is another term that works for me. The term genderqueer kind of aims to blur society's binary views of gender as male or female and sexual orientation as heterosexual or homosexual. To me, the term genderqueer places both gender and sexual orientation on a spectrum, so you don't really have limits and boxes within which you have to identify. So that's another term that I use. And then when I am talking with folks who are less familiar with the word genderqueer or non-binary, I'll use the word trans with a little bit of an asterisk there. And I use that as an umbrella term to describe anyone whose identity or behavior falls outside of stereotypical norms. So it is really when I shifted to a more masculine presentation that I decided to tell my family about how I was feeling about my gender on the inside. My family has been very supportive and accepting of my gender journey so far, and I feel incredibly fortunate in that respect. At first, they had many questions, and some wondered whether this was just a phase. After providing my family with a lot of resources and information and having more conversations with them, I think they began to understand that for me, being non-binary is about being freer to be myself and who I've always been. It's not about becoming someone else. My grandparents, who were the very people I thought would have the hardest time understanding my experience, happen to be a super important part of my support system and have shown an incredible amount of interest in learning more about gender. So that's a little bit about, what I share with my family and the roles that they've played. I'm curious, what has your experience been, Adam?
Yeah, I guess before I can even talk about gender with my family, I have to take a step back and talk about coming out around my sexuality. And I don't want people to maybe mix it up and think like sexuality, gender, it's the same thing. I guess it is two different things, and coming out around your sexuality is very much different from coming out around your gender. But for me, it was 17 years old, senior in high school, and first family member I came out to was my mom and told her I was gay. Didn't know how she would take it, but she didn't take it really well. And she decided that she would call Dad, and Dad didn't take it very well either. Long story short, I had to leave home, and I ended up staying with my best friend and her family at the time to finish up high school. But it was kind of in the middle of college when my parents started coming around, and then the questions around kind of sexuality and gender kind of started getting mixed up for them, and they started asking me questions around, well, you're gay, but are you telling us that you want to be a woman because you like men, right? And it took a lot of like informing and education to let them know, no, that's not what I'm saying. Just because I'm gay and I like men doesn't mean that I'm telling you I want to now be transgender or something. And then there were still questions around gender of like, okay, well, if you're in a relationship with another guy and we think you're a guy, who's really the man in the relationship, right? Or who's the husband and who's the wife, or who's the boyfriend and who's the girlfriend? And again, like needing to sit them down and inform and educate, like, well, we have equal roles. I mean, in my relationships at least, that yeah, maybe I do take on more of a caregiver role, and I might do the laundry and the dishes, but I also make the decisions about what movie we're going to watch on Netflix, and I also make the decisions about where we're going to eat that night. And so I guess the decision power, I don't know, in my mind and in the way I view our relationship, it's quite balanced out, right? And there are just some things I personally don't find interested. I don't find certain roles I want to take on, and so I'll leave that for my partner to take on, and I think that's fine. When it comes to my family then, and my extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, I think that again, because they see me taking on this caregiver role, and I have a lot of younger siblings and a lot of younger cousins and babies, I think the uncles see that as a little bit feminine, but then they see that as weaker too, that here's Adam who's changing diapers, or here's Adam who's bottle feeding the baby, and why isn't Adam, out on the couch watching the football game or something, right? Again, it's just those aren't my personal interests. Whereas I think the women in my family, the aunts really do see me as stronger because they perceive me as a guy, and then here's a guy who's in touch with his feminine side and who can, get along well with the little children. And so again, it's like I catch myself in this middle, and I don't mind it. Um, I guess that's what family dynamics have been for me so far around my gender. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to hear about a potential experience you might have had being misgendered or harassed because of your gender. How did you handle being identified as one gender when you, in fact, identify yourself as another gender, and how did you handle that situation?
Yeah. I guess I would say that the majority of people do see me as cisgender, meaning my sex assigned at birth is male, and I think most of the time people perceive me as male, and and so there's that. People just assume I'm a guy, but maybe a guy who's on the softer side or something. When it comes to misgendering, actually though, it's more kids than adults who misgender me. And so kids at the mall, kids at a playground, um, even by a swimming pool where I'm just wearing trunks and I might be topless. um, I have heard kids ask their parents, whispering in the background, like, is that a guy or is that a girl? Um, and so you kind of just, well, I just tell myself to deal with the awkward stares from the little kids, and I just kind of chalk it up to they're still experiencing gender for themselves at a really young age, and they're trying to make sense of like what are the gender realities and the gender norms of their world, right? And so I try to not take offense to it. I just really try to say the little kids experimenting and learning about gender, so let that little kid ask and stare, right? But there has, I think the most recent time from an adult, I think my shorts were maybe shorter and my tank top was a little bit lower. And so, the clerk at Safeway comes up from behind and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, is there anything I can help you with?" And then I turn around and he doesn't correct himself or anything. Um, but it's just funny to kind of observe those funny moments, and I just laugh it off, right? Um, how about you? Any moments, any times where misgendering has happened? How did you deal with it? If you have tips for other people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was this time actually somewhat recently where it happened. I was at the airport and I chose to use the women's restroom because that's the restroom where I felt most safe and comfortable given the options that were available to me. And after using the facilities, I went in the mirror to put makeup on. And as a person was leaving the women's room, they saw me out of the corner of their eye and had this noticeably like a large reaction to my presence. And I obviously noticed the person noticed me. We had kind of a moment of awkward eye contact. And then the person came over and said, "You do know this is a women's restroom, don't you?" And I turned to the person and I politely said, "I do know which restroom I'm in, thank you." And then I went back to putting on my mascara. Sometimes I do choose to use the men's restroom, but I couldn't imagine feeling safe putting my makeup on there.
Yeah.
So this situation really made me think a lot about how others perceive me and what behaviors are or are not allowed because of those perceptions. So I always feel like, though painful in the moment sometimes, those experiences of misgendering, you can learn a lot from them, for sure.
Right. And it sounds like in that example, I mean, she walked away, she left you alone, and it's like you almost have to pick and choose your battles too, right? Like there are some moments where you might want to share a little bit of information and educate the person, but I guess it's always this cautionary tale of like be aware of your surroundings, right?
Right.
And you mentioned safety too, and I imagine, you know, pick and choose your battles and weigh the risk and the pros and cons of how and when you should engage with someone, I guess.
Totally. And had there been a, gender neutral restroom available, given where I was, I think that would have been the option I would have felt most safest in. But
Right.
when it comes to restrooms, I think for non-binary folks, and I'm speaking for myself personally, I think it feels like you're kind of picking the better of two situations that neither of which feel quite right.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I have another question for you. And I know that in our line of work, we get asked a lot about pronouns and how to use them and how to ask people about their pronouns. So maybe this is like a quick crash course in English 101 or something. But we know about pronoun sets, right? There can be masculine pronouns, there could be feminine pronouns. We think he, him, his for male, she, her, hers for female. But we do have gender neutral pronouns as well too, right? And so you and I, for example, when I say you or when I say I, that's gender neutral. We don't necessarily know the person's gender when we're saying those until we get into something more nuanced, right? So what are some tips when it comes to asking people about their pronouns? Is it important to ask? Why should we even bother? There appear to be other pronouns out there, like people using plural pronouns, they, them, theirs, to refer to an individual person, and some people like it, some people think it's confusing. New pronouns again, like Z, here, here's, and maybe not everyone's familiar with them, but it looks like language and English language and pronoun use is changing and evolving a bit. And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, before I go further into my thoughts, I also wanted to share that the title MX, which is supposed to be a gender neutral title, a version of Mr. and Miss and Mrs., is now kind of a new gender neutral label and title that's being used these days. So I thought I'd add that to the Grammar Gender 101.
Yeah.
But in terms of pronouns, I think individuals ask others about pronouns because it's a really easy and respectful way to honor someone's true gender identity. Gender identity isn't something you can always assume based on what you see. So, for example, many people see me and hear my voice and assume I use she, her, hers pronouns. On other occasions, strangers will read me as male and assume he pronouns. While I know the large majority of people often are just using the pronoun that feels most comfortable to them and comes most easily, I also know that most people aren't purposefully misgendering me or putting me down. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, I realize that some of the pronouns that are used to refer to me don't always feel right. And this can cause some internal conflict. So my recommendation is to always ask. Because when folks ask, I always feel comfortable sharing that my preferred pronouns are they, them, and theirs. It's when folks don't ask, but just assume one or the other, that I feel less comfortable or safe asserting my preferred pronouns because I'm not sure if they, A, know what they are, and B, will feel comfortable with them. So asking is always a really, really positive thing.
Yeah, and I just want to throw in there too that, we talk about pronouns in orally speaking to one another out loud, but I think we can also sometimes challenge social constructions of gender or gender norms, even in writing and how we use pronouns, right? I kind of sometimes I'm mindful about when I'm writing a paper or a blog or an article and there might be a scenario about a person, I sometimes want to leave that person's gender genderless, or I would prefer someone to kind of gender the person themselves because, when we're talking about stories or scenarios, gender can have an unconscious impact on someone's reading of the story or the narrative, right? And so I try to use even they, them, their pronouns in writing in a singular format, even when referring to an individual person. And then sometimes for myself too, when I'm writing about my own pronouns, I like to put S/HE. So instead of saying she or he or they, them, theirs as a pronoun, I actually prefer in writing, for myself at least, and maybe other people might like it as well, just S/HE, no spaces, right? And for me, it's because that slash is in the middle, and that's how I identify that it's a way of writing pronouns that works for me personally.
That's great. Um, so Adam, I'm curious about how you describe the evolution of your gender expression. How would you describe your gender expression currently? And I guess before you go into that, I want to define gender expression for folks that might not know. Gender expression really refers to the ways in which people externally communicate their gender, and that can be through behavior, through clothing, through haircut, through voice, and other forms of presentation such as body language. Gender expression also works the other way, as people assign gender based on the appearance, the mannerisms, and the other gendered characteristics they observe in someone else. So I think that those are kind of some good information to know about gender expression before answering this question.
Yeah, and I like how you framed the question as an evolution. I guess maybe in high school, I did try to present more masculine, but Asian masculinity. And for me, and where I grew up in my hometown, that was like short, spiky hair and t-shirts and jeans. And that was me in high school. By the time I went to college, though, I think I just felt a bit more freedom to explore fashion a bit more with my body type, making my own clothes, dyeing my hair different colors, tattoos, piercings. And I think I just went all in college because I was maybe a bit more reserved in high school. And yet still, while I was doing all that, it was like always being conscious of balancing out the tattoos and piercings with like professionalism, because there'd be internships or there'd be jobs, and our culture and society has some rules about piercings and tattoos and jobs too, right? But now, and fast forward to now, I think my style is a bit more androgynous. I'm actually just more about comfortability now than anything else. So my clothing is probably more loose fitting. It's more flowy because I just need my clothes to breathe sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I'll still shop predominantly in the men's section, but it's more so because of sizing. So the men's cut of clothing just fits me better, but I'm not going for, crew neck t-shirts or boot cut jeans, right? I'm mindful of my color palette. I choose more neutral tones, and so when it comes to my fashion now or my gender expression now, something like clothing or hairstyle, I'm just more mindful of trying to express who I am and not trying to buy into what marketing or advertising says I have to be. Yeah. How about you? Same question.
Awesome. As a young child, I think before I can even really remember, I was already labeled a tomboy. And this label kind of laid the foundation for the expectation that my gender was something that I was supposed to, or my gender expression was something I was supposed to grow out of. I think when and where I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of information about gender variance in childhood and this having any potential impact on gender identity. So, what they called folks who expressed themselves like I did was tomboys. Around puberty, I remember being teased for being too much like a boy and always wearing my hair up, and really started to feel like I didn't fit in. So when I transitioned to middle school, I also quite drastically transitioned my appearance to be more feminine. The pressure to fit in and to succeed socially and to be safe was enough to kind of keep me in this feminine presentation for many years, despite the fact that it caused a lot of discomfort and anxiety for me. Upon learning about gender and other gender expansive people, I started to gain confidence in who I was and how I felt on the inside, and was able to kind of shift my presentation to align with that. And so now I express myself through more stereotypically masculine clothes. I mostly shop in the men's section, but hope that one day there won't be a men's and women's section. They'll just be like clothes. Go check them out and find what you like. And I do continue to really love fashion and makeup and accessories and things of that nature. So there are still things that are feminine that I really, really like about myself, and I hope to carry those feminine traits with me throughout my rest of my life.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, One more question, and then maybe we'll go to Q&A.
Sounds good.
Okay, and so that's maybe a reminder to people who are watching, if there are questions that you have that have come up or questions you've been wanting to ask, you can go ahead and just kind of scroll over the left side, and if you scroll over one of the icons, I think there's an option for Q&A. Click on it, and it should pop up a screen on the right-hand side where you could type in your questions, and Mare and I could see that. So one more question. I think when we're talking about gender, sometimes people conflate or mix up sex and gender, and they think it's the same thing. So when you're asking like, oh, what's someone's sex or what's someone's gender, they just think it's the same, right? But you kind of explain a bit more, or we have at least, around gender identity, gender expression, that these are things that people should consider when they're talking about gender. Biology and anatomy might be a part of it, but is it the same, right? And so how would you differentiate between someone's sex and their gender, and how would you explain that to people?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and we get that question at Gender Spectrum all the time. And when I get this question, I really like to think about distinguishing between bodies and how we feel about ourselves on the inside. So biology is really about bodies, it's about chromosomes, and it's about anatomy, really characteristics that humans are born with. Gender is something that develops over time, and each of us identifies with and expresses based on how we feel on the inside. So looking at those two ideas, when a young baby is born, we can try to identify its sex, but for many young people and children, their gender isn't known until they're able to start expressing it and identifying with different things and preferences. That is when gender comes into play. And so it's important to think about gender as expression, as that inner feeling, in addition to the body. But the body has much more to do about assigned sex at birth. It has much less to do about gender.
Right. We talk about this a lot in our work too, and sometimes also between biology and sex in the natural world. And so, Joel, our another coworker, was a zoologist, right? And Joel sometimes shares about the fact that male seahorses are the ones who become pregnant because the female seahorse puts her eggs in the male seahorse and then he ends up giving birth, right? Or we might see also a species like the clownfish, and made popular by Finding Nemo. And here you have like a matriarchal setup where it's the female clownfish who kind of, I don't know, looks over and protects the clownfish colony. But if something happened to female clownfish, that it's a male clownfish who suddenly changes his biology, anatomy, chromosomes, and everything, and becomes the new matriarch clownfish, right? And so we even have examples in the natural world and of how biology can change, and we don't have these like straight concrete definitions. And so again, I think just re-emphasizing what you just said, biology is one part, but it's not all of it, right?
Right, and I think it's important to also note that when we think of the world that's around us, we think of animals, we often think of like male or female animals or two types of bodies. And I think it's really important to note that there are lots of different types of bodies. What biodiversity has really showed us is that there is much more than just male and female, and there are many species, humans included, who fall somewhere in between the male and female bodies on the spectrum. And so I think it's really important to kind of include those things into this conversation.
Mm-hmm. So we know that we have a good list of questions that came in from the Happy Hippie Foundation over the past several days. And again, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Maybe we can take a quick look at some of these questions that were raised. And I don't know if there's one that pops up to you that you want to address first.
Let's see here. I think this one is a good one for you, Adam.
Okay.
You want me to read the question?
Sure.
All right. The question is, do you have advice for trans teens and adults living in rural communities where cis and heterogender identification is accepted?
Yeah, and maybe I'll tie this into Natasha. I see your question up on the screen as well, looking for some resources for LGBT youth in West Virginia. I guess I'm really going to try to emphasize finding community online and resources and tips for finding community online as well. So, I think in the past people have talked about supporting young people. Just try to find that person at school, that counselor, that teacher you could talk to. Oh, sorry, the car alarm's going off in the background. And that can be hard for some people, right? Like, what if the school doesn't have a supportive club like a GSA, or what if there isn't an adult at school they feel comfortable talking to, and family at home isn't, the adults aren't people they could talk to. I just think it's 2015, and we can really say, with modern day technology in the US at least, that a lot more people have access to the internet, that a lot more people have access to laptops and computers, and they're even offered in public libraries, that with a resource and tool like Gender Spectrum's online community, The Lounge, it's free, you sign up, it only takes a minute, and then you're tapped into, currently we have almost like 600 members, right? So you could immediately find that community. You can find the groups that fit you. We have some groups for artists, some groups for poets, some groups for parents who have kids who are transitioning for the first time. We have some groups for educators and teachers who are looking to, share and develop lesson plans together. So you really can almost customize your experience in the lounge. And I think rural parts of America, or even urban parts of America, but you're still feeling a bit isolated, you can find that community, and it's just online, fingertips away. Yeah.
Great. Do we have any other questions coming in on this side?
How about here's another Happy Hippie question.
We have a question from Sadie here.
Okay.
Sadie has a question. Do you have any advice for a non-binary student at a primarily all-cis school along the lines of bathrooms and PE and stuff? That's a great question, Sadie. Thank you for bringing that up here. Adam, do you want to start, and I can kind of piggyback off of where you want to begin?
Yeah, Sadie. And sometimes the answer will depend on what your county or your state has in terms of rules for schools to offer accommodations to gender expansive youth. But there are also federal protections, so it would apply to, youth, any school anywhere in the country. But when it comes to something like primarily an all cis school, so I'm assuming maybe it's an all boys school or an all girls school, um, having still either a locker room setup or a restroom stall that is still gender neutral, that could be used by any student or any staff even, could be beneficial for not just that one student, right? It could be beneficial for everyone. And I think that's a fair argument to when making a request like that. Um, when it comes to even sports teams and PEs, sometimes you need that extra privacy, and it doesn't even have to do with gender. Maybe it's because of um, a temporary or permanent disability someone might have, and they just need that extra space, that extra privacy to change out of clothes, change into uniform, right? And again, it's like, I think sometimes when we're talking about facilities at schools, bathrooms, locker rooms, that we try to think it's just a gender issue, but I think it's something that could benefit a lot of people, everyone in the student body, everyone at school, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that you hit on a lot of great points. I think that I think it's tough to be a non-binary person at an all cis school because it kind of feels like you were left out of the plan. So I can definitely empathize with that experience, and I think that something that is really important to think about is how other cisgender people might be gender expansive in some ways. There might be a cisgender girl who gets really uncomfortable and teased using the women's restroom because she likes to dress a lot like a boy or prefers to wear the boys' PE uniform. Or there might be a boy who would prefer the girls' PE uniform, and they might all be cisgendered folks. And so I think some of the issues that you bring up around like difficulties that non-binary young people face when navigating issues like bathrooms and things like PE and uniforms. I think those are issues that more heavily impact non-binary people, but they really impact a lot of other people too. And so something that's really important to bring to the attention of your school would be kind of how some of these issues impact everyone. And if you can find some allies in your community that talk about how they felt unsafe in a bathroom, or they felt, that their gender wasn't honored in a certain situation, I think that it'll help the school to understand that some of these more inclusive accommodations really aren't about that one trans or non-binary student, but it's about making everyone feel safe.
Yeah, and again, if you're not sure what your school's policies are, or if you're not sure what your district's policies are, um, maybe if you have a leadership club or a GSA club of some sort, maybe that's a campaign you and your fellow club members could research a bit more, find out what the rules are. And in some cases, you might find out my school just doesn't have those resources, or it doesn't have a rule or a policy. Then I would even advocate for getting organized, getting involved and creating some awareness at your school, because I'm sure that you could find allies in the greater student body to help you raise some awareness, get local media involved, and be that catalyst for change if that's something that you personally want to have for your school and for anyone else who comes to your school after you graduate, right?
Great question.
Yes.
Adam, we'll look for the next one.
Yeah. Let's do, and we have about 10 more minutes, so we'll try to do a couple more. Here's one from Bradley. Why are preferred pronouns important? I have a friend who recently changed their pronoun, and a few people have struggled to use the right one. Any advice on what to tell them? Yeah, we talked about pronouns a little bit, and let's continue to talk about pronouns. Like our label's important, our pronouns important. You want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it really, really depends on the person. I really think that pronouns are important to some people, and it's really important for their peer groups and their family to use their preferred pronoun. I know other people who have a lot of flexibility with their pronouns. They're okay with some people using this pronoun who have known them that way for a long time, and other people they prefer to use a different pronoun. So unfortunately, there's no quick and easy answer to the pronoun question. It really has to be a conversation about what that particular person's preference is. A teen that we worked with during one of our conferences once gave a really great advice to parents about practicing pronouns when they were having difficulty. And that was to just get a plant and name it they. And that way, when you're watering them, you're giving them food, you can really start practicing using this plural pronoun that may not be so comfortable in your vocabulary. And if you slip up, you won't be totally taken aback, like I might have hurt someone, I might have offended someone. You can kind of practice with this plant. So that's something that young people have told their parents, like, hey, practice on this plant and then maybe you'll get better at calling me the pronoun that I want. So that's one piece of advice. And I think another piece of advice that I would have is also to be patient. As much as I would love for everyone in my life to use they, them pronouns, I understand that that's going to take time, and that's going to take a lot of kind of conversations with some people about why that's so important to me and what that means. And so I think that time is also a big factor when shifting pronouns, because, we can't unfortunately just immediately reprogram our brains to substitute one thing for the other. It does take a little bit of slipping up and effort. And so I would say on the other side is to try to have compassion for folks who are trying and might be slipping up, because they will get there, but it takes time.
Yeah, and Bradley, the way I read your question too is you're almost asking like, what could I do because this is my friend? And it sounds like a question that maybe many other allies might have. So you have a friend who recently changed their pronoun, but maybe other people at school or family members just aren't getting it. And I'm not sure if people are doing it deliberately or not, right? So let's think the best of people, and let's say that people are just having a hard time because they've always known your friend as one thing, and now your friend's saying the other, and people want to do right by them. I think that as an ally and as this person's friend, that it would be pretty big of you to even pull these other people aside if it's, let's say, the same group of friends, and to just say, hey, I know that we're all trying to learn this person's pronoun or new pronoun, and maybe we all just be patient with one another, and if we do slip up, we apologize on the spot. Like, that's the pact we're all going to make with one another. And so that way too, it's like the person who has a pronoun change just feels like they're really being supported by their friends and community, right? That even if people are making a slip up, it's not intentional. And if you just own up to it, then I feel like, people can just say, don't worry about it. It was a slip up. I know you're trying. And it almost creates like a better bonding experience for everyone, even around this, and it shouldn't be an issue, but this pronoun change that's happening just right now, right?
Totally. I appreciate you adding that on, Adam. I wanted to more directly answer Natasha's question about getting help for trans kids in West Virginia. I think that the Gender Spectrum Lounge would be a great place for you to connect the youth that you work with to. The Gender Spectrum Lounge, like Adam said earlier, is a great online space for folks to be as anonymous or not as they want. They can ask questions, they can post questions in forums to get other people to respond to them, and there's a really great way to share resources. One of the goals of the Gender Spectrum Lounge, which is to really centralize all the great information that's out there about gender. That's why we're including everyone from professionals to caregivers, to youth, to schools, because we really feel like there is a wealth of information out there, but it's not concentrated, and there are people in need of this information. And so I invite you to join the lounge, Natasha, to share the lounge with the LGBT youth you work with, because I imagine that's a space where they might find a great deal of support and resources that kind of reflect some of their experiences.
Yeah, and there's also a feature in the lounge where you can create your own group. So I mentioned, I think the lounge right now has something like 27 or so different groups, and it might be broken down based off of interest or age range or whatnot. And so if you're an organization or a school or a club who wants to create their own group in the lounge just for your own members to get organized um, and meet with one another on an online space. Again, it's a free service and tool, and all you have to do is fill out a short form after you log in, and Gender Spectrum, I think, would be happy to help you create an online space or an online group for your members to talk about gender.
Awesome. All right, I think this is going to be the last question before we sign off. I saw a question come in from Spencer. Spencer wants to know, how can someone reveal their true identity if they are not fully sure of how to identify themselves yet? What is a way to come out if you don't know how to identify yourself? Thank you. Thank you, Spencer. I think that's a really good question, and I could resonate with that in my experience a little bit, so I can speak to that, and then Adam, if you have anything to add on, please feel free. I think that when I decided to share my questioning of my gender with my family more formally, it was definitely a questioning. It wasn't an answer. So, I kind of began this conversation with them and let them know that the things that I was thinking about and the things that I was questioning and kind of how long I'd been questioning them. And I used a couple examples from various points of my life to kind of demonstrate that I'd been thinking about these things for a really long time. But in that conversation with them, when I'm sharing about my thoughts about my gender, I never kind of gave this idea of what was going to happen next, right? Like, it was never like, because of this, now I'm going to be that. It was really just opening this conversation of like, this is how I feel on the inside, and this is who I am. I don't really have a word for that yet, but I feel like a mixture of male and female, and I don't know whether or not like transition or surgery or any of that stuff is for me. That all of those things, might come later, or they might not come at all. But coming out doesn't necessarily need to mean coming out with an answer. I think coming out can be coming out with a question, and it's really brave and honest to come out with a question of, hey, I'm figuring out who I am, and I would love to kind of include you, people that care about me, in that process. I unfortunately don't have answers right now, but like, I'm looking for support and understanding around the questions that I have. So I think that that's how I would address that a little bit, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that coming out for folks who are coming out around sexual orientation is a little bit different than talking about gender, because for some and many people, gender is something you come to know over time, and there's not always a label that feels like it's just right for you.
Right. That was beautifully said, Mare. Maybe some people have heard this expression or this quote that life is a journey, not a destination. And I think that in this spirit and this theme of being patient, it's also being patient with yourself too. That, try, in society, it's going to happen so often that people are going to try to box you into one thing or the other. And just try not to get caught up in that pattern and that cycle of boxing in yourself as well. And so giving yourself that time to explore everything you want to explore, read what you want to read, do the research you want to research, and then come to your own conclusion when you're ready. And one conclusion doesn't mean that's the answer you have to stick with for the rest of your life either, right? And that's where, I spoke about gender fluid earlier, but uh, it really is an identity and a way of living for some people that to be gender fluid, that some days I just feel more male, some days I just feel more female, some days I feel like both, sometimes I feel like neither, and that's what the fluidity is, right? It's moving and it's not stagnant, and it works for some people. And so again, take that time to become informed and learn and experience new experiences, and hopefully you'll come to your own truth.
Thanks for that, Adam. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, so I want to take a moment to thank our audience for participating, for listening, for submitting questions. I want to thank the Happy Hippie Foundation for making this webinar possible and sending out questions to the Happy Hippies. Thank you so much, Happy Hippies, for sending in questions. And then we will have a YouTube video posted in the next 24 hours on the Gender Spectrum YouTube page. You can check that out at youtube.com/genderspectrum. So we really appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter at Gender Spectrum. Happy Hippie FDN is the handle for Happy Hippie Foundation. You can live tweet, share tweets afterwards, just tag us. And this is just the beginning. We look forward to kind of hosting and sharing more conversations in the future and getting to know, the audience a bit more too. So thanks again, everyone. You're all awesome.
Bye-bye.